Vincent Morrison had always been a man who calculated odds. 25 years in military intelligence had taught him to read people like weather patterns, predictable yet dangerous when storms gathered. At 52, with silver threading through his dark hair and scars mapping stories across his weathered hands, he possessed the kind of quiet intensity that made weaker men uncomfortable. The oncologist's words echoed in the sterile room. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 6 months, maybe 8, with aggressive treatment. Vincent's expression never changed. He'd faced death before in the mountains of Afghanistan and the back alleys of Prague. This was just another mission with a ticking clock. Dr. Patricia Henley, a woman who had delivered thousands of these conversations, found herself unsettled by his calm. "Mr. Morrison, I know this is overwhelming. We have counselors." "No need," Vincent's voice carried the weight of authority. "What are my options?" As the doctor outlined treatments, chemotherapy, radiation, experimental trials, Vincent's mind was already 3 moves ahead. Diana would take this news badly. Their marriage had grown cold over the past 2 years, ever since he'd retired from government work to focus on family. The irony wasn't lost on him that trying to be present had somehow made him invisible. Their children, Emma and Ryan, both in their early 20s, had grown distant too. Emma, a marketing executive in Chicago, barely called. Ryan, fresh out of college and working at his girlfriend's father's firm, seemed more interested in his trust fund than family bonds. Vincent had built his fortune carefully. Military pension, consulting contracts, and wise investments in defense contractors. The family's $4.2 million estate in Westfield reflected years of calculated decisions. But money, he'd learned, couldn't buy loyalty. Walking to his Range Rover in the hospital parking garage, Vincent noticed Diana's car wasn't in their driveway when he drove past. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Her boutique fitness studio closed at noon on weekdays. That evening, he told her over dinner at their mahogany table, the same one where they'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays for 15 years. Cancer. Diana's fork clattered against her plate. At 48, she still turned heads with her blonde hair and carefully maintained figure. How long? 6 to 8 months. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Vincent watched her face, reading micro-expressions the way he once read enemy combatants. Fear, yes, sadness perhaps, but underneath something else, relief. "We'll fight this," she said. But her eyes were already calculating something he couldn't quite decipher. 3 weeks later, Vincent began noticing the signs. Diana's phone face down during dinner, gym sessions that ran mysteriously long, and new lingerie that never made appearances at home. A husband trained in surveillance doesn't miss such details. The confirmation came on a rainy Thursday morning. Vincent had scheduled a chemotherapy session but postponed it, claiming illness. Instead, he followed Diana to the Marriott downtown, watching from his car as she met Troy Whitman in the lobby. Troy was everything Vincent wasn't. Young, flashy, and soft. At 35, he owned 3 luxury car dealerships and flashed his success like a peacock displaying feathers. His divorce status and reputation as a playboy were well known in their social circle. Vincent had met him at charity galas, watching how Troy's eyes lingered on other men's wives. Through the lobby's glass windows, Vincent observed them embrace, not the greeting of friends, but the desperate clutch of lovers stealing time. His trained mind cataloged details, Troy's hand on Diana's lower back, the way she melted into him, how they moved toward the elevators with practiced familiarity. Vincent felt no rage. Rage was emotion, and emotion clouded judgment. Instead, he felt the cold calculation that had kept him alive in hostile territories. Diana had made her choice. Now he would make his. That evening, Diana returned home with a story about lunch with her sister Claire in the city. Vincent listened, nodding sympathetically as she described traffic delays that perfectly explained her 4-hour absence. "How are you feeling?" she asked, touching his forehead with practiced concern. "Tired but fighting." The real fight, Vincent knew, would come later. Over the next few days, he employed skills learned in darker corners of government service. a small GPS tracker on Diana's BMW, software to mirror her phone, and bank account monitoring that revealed cash withdrawals coinciding with her errands. The pattern emerged clearly: Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at the Marriott. Diana had been generous with their joint accounts, funding her affair with Vincent's money. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so pathetic, but the betrayal went deeper. Listening to recovered voicemails, Vincent discovered Diana discussing contingency plans with Troy, life insurance policies, estate planning. The cancer had accelerated her timeline, but clearly she'd been planning her exit long before the diagnosis. "I just need to be patient," Diana's voice whispered from the recording. "Once he's gone, we can be together openly. The kids already think I deserve better." The kids. Vincent's jaw tightened as he processed this revelation. His own children were complicit in this orchestrated abandonment. The confrontation came sooner than Vincent expected. Emma and Ryan arrived together on a Saturday morning, their faces set with grim determination. Diana stood behind them like a general positioning her troops. "Dad, we need to talk," Emma began, her voice artificially steady. She'd inherited Vincent's piercing blue eyes, but none of his patience. "This situation isn't fair to Mom." Situation. Vincent remained seated in his leather armchair, fingers steepled. Ryan stepped forward, his youth making him bold and foolish. "The cancer, Dad. It's going to be ugly, expensive. Mom shouldn't have to watch you deteriorate." Vincent studied his son. Soft hands, designer clothes, the entitled bearing of someone who'd never faced real hardship. "I see. We found a facility," Diana said, finally joining the conversation. "Sunset Manor. It's very nice. Full medical support." "You mean a place to die?" The silence confirmed everything Vincent needed to know. His family had already written his obituary. Emma's voice cracked slightly. We can't watch you suffer. And honestly, Dad, we can't afford to put our lives on hold." "Your lives?" Vincent's voice carried no emotion. "Of course. We're done waiting for you to die," Ryan said with brutal honesty. "This is better for everyone." Diana produced papers from her purse. "I filed for divorce. It'll be quick, uncontested. You'll keep half of everything, which is more than enough for your care." Vincent accepted the papers without reading them. Behind Diana, he glimpsed a figure by the window, Troy Whitman smoking a cigarette by his silver Porsche. The man couldn't even wait in the car properly. "When do I leave?" Vincent asked. "Today," Diana said. "I've packed your clothes and these." She handed him a cardboard box filled with photo albums and mementos. "Enjoy the memories." The kiss she gave him was theatrical, performed for an audience of one. Troy's cologne lingered on her lips. At Sunset Manor, a grim facility that smelled of disinfectant and defeat, Vincent found himself in a sparse room with a single window overlooking a parking lot. The other residents were warehoused bodies waiting for death, exactly what his family assumed he'd become. Nurse Rebecca Martinez, a tired woman in her 50s, helped him settle in. "You can make one phone call to let people know you're here," she said kindly. "Family policy?" Vincent smiled for the first time in weeks. "Just one call." "I'm sorry, but yes, budget constraints." That evening, as Sunset Manor settled into its usual rhythm of forgotten lives, Vincent dialed a number he knew by heart. The phone rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Konstantin, it's Vincent." Silence stretched across the connection before Konstantin Petrov spoke again, his Russian accent thick with surprise. "My friend, I heard about your diagnosis. I am sorry." "Don't be. I need a favor." "Of course, anything." Vincent outlined his situation in careful detail. Konstantin listened without interruption, a professional courtesy between two men who'd operated in shadows. "Your family," Konstantin said finally. "They sound like people who mistake kindness for weakness. A common error." "How much time do we have?" "The doctors say 6 months. I think we can work with less. Consider it done. The old protocols, all of them. But Konstantin, I want them to understand their mistake before the end." "As you wish. Welcome back to the game, Vincent. Vincent hung up and laid back on the narrow bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Tomorrow, Diana and Troy would begin planning their new life together. The children would return to their selfish pursuits, content that their burden had been efficiently disposed of. None of them knew that Vincent Morrison had just activated a network that stretched from Moscow to Mexico City, built over 25 years of classified operations. They thought they were dealing with a dying man. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. By dawn, the machine was already in motion. Constantine's reach extended far beyond what most people could imagine. A spider's web of contacts spanning legitimate businesses, gray markets, and darker territories where questions weren't asked. Vincent's first visitor arrived at 8 a.m., disguised as a chaplain. Father Miguel Santos possessed the kind of calm demeanor that made people trust him instinctively. Few knew that before his calling to serve God, he'd served other masters in the intelligence community. "Vincent," Miguel said, settling into the visitor's chair. "Constantine briefed me. We're all sorry about your situation. Sorry enough to help. Brother, we're family. Family doesn't abandon family." Miguel passed Vincent a small cross pendant. Inside its hollow chamber were 3 items: a secure phone, a credit card linked to untraceable accounts, and a micro USB drive containing detailed dossiers. "Your wife and her lover," Miguel explained. "Complete backgrounds, financial records, psychological profiles. Some interesting details emerged." Vincent plugged the drive into the outdated computer terminal in the facility's recreation room, claiming to research treatment options. The files painted a picture more complex than simple infidelity. Troy Whitman's dealerships were struggling, cash flow problems hidden behind flashy success. His divorce had been costly, and his ex-wife's attorney had been particularly thorough. Diana represented more than love. She was his financial salvation. Diana's boutique fitness studio was similarly troubled. Rising rent costs and increased competition had squeezed profits. She'd been borrowing against the house equity to keep it afloat. Transactions Vincent's illness had prevented him from monitoring. But the most interesting discovery involved Ryan. Vincent's son had been embezzling from his girlfriend's father's company, small amounts but consistent. Emma's marketing firm was being investigated for fraudulent billing practices, though she remained unaware of the probe. His children weren't just ungrateful, they were desperate. "There's more," Miguel had warned. "Diana and Troy have been planning this for 18 months. The affair started before your diagnosis." They were already discussing marriage when the cancer appeared. Vincent absorbed this information with professional detachment. Emotion would cloud his judgment, and judgment was all that mattered now. The next phase required careful orchestration. Vincent's deterioration began slowly. Missed meals, extended sleep periods, complaints of increasing pain. The staff at Sunset Manor, accustomed to such decline, adjusted his care accordingly. Within a week, he'd been moved to the hospice wing, where visitors were limited and oversight minimal. This suited Vincent's purposes perfectly. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, his new primary physician, was another old contact, a battlefield surgeon who'd patched up operatives in places that didn't officially exist. Her presence at Sunset Manor wasn't coincidental. "How long do you need?" she asked during their first private consultation. 3 months to implement, 2 months to execute, 1 month to finish. The cancer is real, but you and I both know that timelines are fluid with proper medical support. Dr. Walsh nodded. "I can give you 6 months of functional time. After that, nature takes its course." 6 months is plenty. That evening, Vincent received his first call from Diana. The number on the facility's caller ID showed she was phoning from Troy's house. "Vincent, how are you settling in?" Her voice carried forced cheerfulness, the tone people used when performing kindness for witnesses. "Poorly. The pain is getting worse." "I'm sorry. Do you need anything?" "My family." Silence stretched between them. In the background, Vincent could hear Troy's voice, though the words were unclear. "The kids send their love. Diana said finally. They're dealing with this in their own way. I understand. Vincent, I want you to know that despite everything, I hope you find peace. I will, Vincent promised, soon. After hanging up, Vincent smiled. Diana had called from Troy's landline, not her cell phone. That single detail told him everything about their confidence level. They felt safe, protected, beyond his reach. Tomorrow he would begin teaching them how wrong they were. The transformation of Vincent Morrison from dying patient to puppet master began with small, seemingly random events across the city. Troy Whitman arrived at his flagship dealership on Monday morning to find his coffee shop neighbor, Cafe Milano, had been sold to new owners. The previous owner, an elderly Italian man named Jeppe, had apparently received an offer too good to refuse. The new owners were polite, but made it clear they'd be renovating extensively, starting with the shared parking area. By Tuesday, Troy's prime parking spaces were blocked by construction equipment. By Wednesday, the cafe's new sound system was being tested with what could only be described as experimental jazz, at volumes that made customer conversations impossible. Just bad luck, Troy told his sales manager Derek Hopkins as they watched potential customers walk away from the chaos. Derek, a 20-year veteran of car sales, wasn't so sure. 3 coincidences make a pattern, boss. Meanwhile, Diana's problems began more subtly. Her fitness studio's landlord, Wallace Properties, had been purchased by a shell company. The new owners wanted to reassess all current lease agreements and requested detailed financial records dating back 3 years. The letter arrived the same day her top instructor, Maria Santos, announced she was leaving to start her own studio across town. Maria had been offered a partnership deal and startup capital that Diana couldn't match. It's just business, Diana, Maria said, though she couldn't meet her boss's eyes. You understand? By Thursday, Diana had lost 3 more instructors and 12 long-term clients. Word was spreading that her studio was unstable, possibly closing. In the fitness industry, reputation was everything. It's like someone's orchestrating this, Diana told Troy over dinner at his increasingly empty dealership. First your problems, now mine. Troy forced a smile, though stress was etching new lines around his eyes. We'll figure it out. Maybe it's time to make some changes anyway. Neither suspected that every challenge they faced had been carefully designed by a man they dismissed as a dying nuisance. Vincent's coordination of these events happened through a network his family couldn't imagine. Constantine's contacts had purchased the cafe through 3 layers of shell companies. Maria Santos was Father Miguel's cousin, and her new studio's financing came from Vatican charities with unusually flexible investment criteria. But the psychological campaign was just the beginning. Vincent's next move required a more personal touch. Using his secure phone, he contacted an old asset named Tommy Brennan, a private investigator whose methods occasionally ventured into gray areas. I need surveillance on 2 targets, Vincent explained. Full spectrum, digital, physical, financial, everything like the old days. Exactly like the old days. Tommy's team was thorough. Within 48 hours, they'd established that Diana and Troy met every Tuesday and Thursday at the Marriott, but also maintained a second location, a small apartment Troy had rented under his deceased father's name. More interestingly, Diana had opened a private safe deposit box using her maiden name. What's in the box? Vincent asked. Working on it. But the timing is interesting. She opened it 2 weeks after your diagnosis. Vincent filed this information away. Diana was more calculating than he'd given her credit for. The safe deposit box suggested she was preparing for multiple contingencies. His children required different approaches. Emma's marketing firm was indeed under federal investigation, but the probe was moving slowly through bureaucratic channels. Vincent arranged for that investigation to accelerate, ensuring Emma's name appeared prominently in the files. Ryan's embezzlement was easier to address. Vincent anonymously provided evidence to his girlfriend's father, including detailed transaction records and timestamps. The young man's sticky fingers had been busier than anyone suspected. By Friday evening, both of Vincent's children had received urgent summons from their respective employers, emergency meetings, serious discussions about their futures. The beautiful irony was that Vincent wasn't framing his children. He was simply revealing crimes they had already committed. Their greed had provided him with the perfect weapons. As the week ended, Vincent lay in his narrow hospice bed, monitoring the chaos through encrypted communications. Diana and Troy were beginning to crack under the pressure. Their carefully planned future was developing stress fractures. But Vincent was just getting started. The real pain would begin when they realized someone was hunting them, and that their abandoned patriarch might not be as helpless as they'd assumed. The game was accelerating, and Vincent Morrison was playing by rules his family had never learned. Monday morning brought fresh disasters for the conspirators. Troy Whitman discovered that his business insurance had been canceled due to irregularities in his application process. The insurance company, Hartford Financial, claimed they'd found discrepancies in his reported revenue figures dating back 2 years. "This is impossible," Troy shouted at his insurance agent, a nervous man named Pete Kovac. "I've never lied on any applications." "Mr. Whitman, I'm sorry, but the audit uncovered significant inconsistencies. Without insurance, you can't legally operate the dealership." Troy's face paled. "Audit? What audit? Nobody told me about any audit." Pete shuffled papers uncomfortably. "It was initiated by an anonymous tip to our fraud division, very detailed. Someone provided documentation we couldn't ignore." As Troy struggled with his insurance crisis, Diana faced her own catastrophe. The IRS had arrived at her fitness studio with a warrant to examine her books. Agent Sarah Martinez explained that they'd received reports of unreported cash income and fraudulent business expense claims. "Ma'am, we have detailed records suggesting you've been operating a cash-only side business," Agent Martinez said, spreading documents across Diana's desk. "Personal training sessions that weren't reported as income." Diana's mouth went dry. She had been taking cash payments from private clients, money she'd used to fund her affair without leaving traces her husband might discover. There must be some mistake. The documentation is quite thorough. Someone provided us with dates, times, and client names. We'll need to examine all your financial records going back 3 years. By Wednesday, both Diana and Troy were drowning in bureaucratic investigations that seemed to come from nowhere. Their stress was compounding, and their affair, once a source of joy and excitement, had become a liability neither could afford. Emma Morrison received her own devastating news. That week, the FBI had expanded their investigation into her marketing firm, and her name appeared on a list of employees suspected of creating fraudulent billing schemes. Her supervisor, Janet Walsh, called her into the office with barely concealed panic. "Emma, I need to ask you directly. Have you been inflating client billing hours?" Emma's stomach dropped. She had been padding her timesheets, small amounts that she'd assumed would never be noticed. Sometimes I round up. The FBI has transaction records showing systematic overbilling tied to your account codes. They're talking about criminal charges." Ryan's situation was equally dire. His girlfriend's father, Richard Dalton, had confronted him with evidence of embezzlement that was so detailed it included screenshots of Ryan's computer activity. $15,000, Richard said, his voice cold as winter. "Spread across 8 months. Did you think I was stupid, boy?" Ryan's hands trembled as he stared at the evidence. "Mr. Dalton, I can explain. You stole from me while dating my daughter, while sleeping under my roof. You're finished, Ryan, financially, professionally, and personally." By Thursday evening, Vincent's family was in complete crisis mode. Diana called an emergency family meeting at Troy's house, a location she thought was secure from whatever forces seemed to be attacking their lives. Vincent learned about the meeting through Tommy Brennan's surveillance team. Hidden cameras in Troy's living room provided real-time audio and video feeds that Vincent watched from his hospice bed with the detached interest of a chess master observing amateur players. "This can't be coincidental," Diana said, pacing Troy's living room like a caged animal. "All of us being investigated at the same time. Someone's targeting us." Emma sat on the couch next to her brother, both looking haggard. "But who?" And why? Troy loosened his tie, stress evident in every movement. Maybe it's connected to Vincent somehow. Dad's dying, Ryan said. He's stuck in hospice care. How could he be behind this? Diana stopped pacing. Vincent has connections, military intelligence, government contracts. Maybe he found out about us before he got sick. Found out what? Emma asked. Diana and Troy exchanged glances. They hadn't told the children about the depth of their affair or their plans. About my divorce plans, Diana said carefully. Maybe he's trying to hurt me financially before he dies. Vincent smiled at the television screen. They were beginning to understand they had an enemy, but they still couldn't grasp the scope of their miscalculation. Troy stood up, decision hardening his features. We need to accelerate our timeline. Get the divorce finalized immediately. Transfer what assets we can before these investigations destroy everything. What about the kids? Diana asked. Emma and Ryan looked confused and hurt. They'd been tools in their mother's plan, but nobody had bothered to explain the full strategy. They'll be fine, Troy said dismissively. They're adults. They can handle their own problems. Vincent felt a cold satisfaction as he watched his children realize they'd been abandoned twice. First when they discarded him, and now when their mother chose her lover over them. The meeting continued for another hour, devolving into arguments about money, blame, and survival strategies. By the end, cracks were showing in every relationship in the room. As Vincent prepared for sleep that night, he reflected on the progress. His enemies were isolated, stressed, and beginning to turn on each other. The next phase would require more direct action. Tomorrow he would teach them that some mistakes couldn't be undone. Friday brought the beginning of the end for Diana and Troy's carefully constructed fantasy. Vincent's plan entered its most aggressive phase with surgical precision. At 8 a.m., Troy arrived at his dealership to find it surrounded by federal agents. DEA badges gleamed in the morning sunlight as agents seized vehicles, computers, and financial records. Agent Carlos Rodriguez approached Troy with the calm authority of someone who held all the cards. Troy Whitman, you're under arrest for money laundering and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. What? This is insane. I sell cars. You also clean money for the Torino family, Agent Rodriguez said, producing an arrest warrant. We have financial records showing systematic washing of drug proceeds through your dealerships over the past 18 months. Troy's face went white. He'd never dealt drugs in his life, but Vincent's team had been thorough in creating evidence. Constantine's connections included financial experts who could make paper trails appear and disappear like magic tricks. The beauty of the frame was its simplicity. Vincent hadn't fabricated the drug connection from nothing. Troy had unknowingly sold 3 vehicles to Torino associates, paying cash and avoiding financing paperwork. Those legitimate transactions became the foundation for an elaborate money laundering scheme that existed only in carefully constructed financial records. While Troy was being processed at Federal Holding, Diana received devastating news of her own. Her safe deposit box, the one she'd opened under her maiden name, had been emptied by court order. The contents, which included $47,000 in cash and jewelry, were now evidence in her tax evasion case. How did they know about the box? Diana demanded of her attorney, Marcus Friedman. Someone provided them with detailed information about your financial activities, Marcus replied grimly. The IRS has documentation going back 2 years. Your personal training payments, the cash deposits, even the jewelry purchases. It's like someone was tracking your every move. Diana felt the walls closing in around her. I need to see Vincent. Your estranged husband? Why? Because he's the only person who could know all of this. That afternoon, Diana arrived at Sunset Manor, looking like a woman on the edge of collapse. The stress of the past week had stripped away her carefully maintained facade, revealing someone desperate and frightened. Vincent received her in the facility's small visiting room, wheeled in by an attendant who discreetly withdrew. To Diana's eyes, he looked exactly like what she expected. A dying man in a wheelchair, oxygen tank beside him, pale and diminished. Vincent, she said, sitting across from him, We need to talk. About what? About what's happening to us. The investigations, the arrests. This isn't coincidence. Vincent studied her with eyes that seemed both tired and alert. I don't understand. Troy was arrested today. Drug charges, money laundering. It's impossible, but the evidence... I'm sorry to hear that. Diana leaned forward, searching his face for any sign of deception. The timing is suspicious, Vincent. Everything started falling apart right after we brought you here. You think I'm responsible? Vincent's voice carried a tone of weary confusion. Diana, I'm dying. I can barely leave this room without assistance. But your connections? What connections? I'm a retired government consultant who's been out of the game for 3 years. Who do you think I could call? And even if I wanted revenge, do you honestly believe I'd waste my final months on something so elaborate? Vincent's performance was masterful. Just enough confusion to seem genuine, just enough weakness to appear harmless. Diana wanted to believe he was responsible because that would mean her problems had a source she could fight. The alternative, that their world was collapsing through sheer bad luck, was too terrifying to accept. The children are in trouble too, Diana said. Emma's being investigated by the FBI. Ryan lost his job and might face criminal charges. Our children. For the first time, Vincent showed real emotion, concern and sadness that seemed entirely authentic. What happened? Diana explained about the fraud investigations, watching Vincent's face carefully. His reactions seemed genuine shock, disappointment, and worry for his children despite their abandonment of him. I need to help them, Vincent said. Whatever our problems, Diana, they're still my children. You're in hospice care. What can you do? Vincent was quiet for a long moment, appearing to wrestle with internal conflict. Finally, he spoke with the hesitant voice of a man making a difficult decision. I have some money set aside, emergency funds for my consulting work, about $200,000 in an account the divorce papers don't mention. If the kids need legal help. Diana's eyes sharpened. You'd help them after what they did? They're my children. I love them even if they can't love me back. It was exactly what Diana wanted to hear, confirmation that Vincent was still the forgiving, family-focused man she'd married, someone she could manipulate one final time. Where is this money? Vincent provided account details with the reluctance of a dying man making peace with his family. Diana memorized every digit, already planning how to access funds that could solve all their problems. She left Sunset Manor, convinced that Vincent was exactly what he appeared. A sick, broken man who still loved his family despite their cruelty. The account information was a gift from someone who had nothing left to lose. Diana had no way of knowing that the account was real. The money existed, and accessing it would trigger the final phase of Vincent's carefully orchestrated revenge. As her car disappeared from the parking lot, Vincent smiled and reached for his secure phone. Phase 3 was about to begin. The account Diana accessed contained exactly what Vincent had promised, $1,200 in emergency funds. What he hadn't mentioned was that the account was monitored by federal authorities as part of an ongoing investigation into overseas money transfers related to national security. By Tuesday morning, Diana found herself in handcuffs as FBI agents executed a search warrant at her home. Special Agent Lisa Hartwell explained the charges with bureaucratic precision. Mrs. Morrison, you're being arrested for accessing funds connected to suspected terrorist financing. The account you withdrew from is flagged as part of a national security investigation. That's impossible. It's my husband's money. Mrs. Morrison, this account has been tracked for 8 months as part of Operation Clean Sweep. Your access triggered automatic alerts. Vincent had created the perfect trap. The account was legitimate, money he'd earned from consulting work with defense contractors. But Constantine's team had ensured that the account's routing numbers matched those flagged in a broader terrorism financing investigation. Diana's withdrawal made her an automatic person of interest in a federal case that had nothing to do with her affair but everything to do with her greed. While Diana sat in federal holding, her legal problems multiplied exponentially. The terrorism financing angle meant her assets could be frozen under the Patriot Act. Her divorce from Vincent was suspended pending the investigation. The $200,000 she'd withdrawn was seized as evidence. Troy, still facing his own drug charges, received news that his bail had been revoked. New evidence had surfaced suggesting he was a flight risk, evidence that included fabricated documents showing he'd been researching non-extradition countries and offshore banking. Emma and Ryan, meanwhile, learned that their parents' arrests had made their own legal situations exponentially worse. Prosecutors loved family crime networks, and the Morrison case was becoming exactly that narrative. Vincent watched the cascade of consequences from his hospice bed with the satisfaction of an artist completing a masterpiece. Every element was falling into place precisely as designed. His secure phone buzzed with an update from Tommy Brennan. Troy's lawyers are pushing for a plea deal. Diana's attorney is arguing entrapment. The kids are panicking. And our timeline. Vincent asked, "Everyone should be in holding or house arrest within 48 hours. No chance of coordinated response." Vincent nodded. It was time for the final revelation. Wednesday afternoon brought unexpected visitors to Sunset Manor. Emma and Ryan arrived together, both looking haggard and desperate. They'd been released on bail but faced federal charges that could destroy their lives. "Dad," Emma said, her voice breaking, "we need to talk." Vincent appeared frailer than during Diana's visit, his oxygen tank working harder, his voice weaker. Dr. Walsh had adjusted his medication to enhance the appearance of rapid decline. "My children," he whispered, "I'm so sorry about your mother, about everything that's happening." Ryan sat beside his father's wheelchair, guilt and desperation warring in his expression. "Dad, we were wrong about leaving you here, about everything." "We were scared," Emma added, "and selfish, but we're family, and we should have stayed together." Vincent reached out with a trembling hand to touch theirs. "I forgive you. I understand why you did what you did." "Can you help us?" Ryan asked. "Mom said you had emergency money, but now she's in jail and we don't know what to do." "That money is gone," Vincent said sadly. "Your mother took it all, but there might be another way." Emma leaned closer. What? "I have information about Troy, about his real business activities, things the prosecutors don't know yet." This was the beautiful lie that would complete Vincent's revenge. There was no additional information about Troy. Vincent's team had already provided everything necessary to convict him. But his children didn't know that. "What kind of information?" Ryan asked. "Evidence that could prove Troy was the real criminal, that your mother was manipulated by him, that you children were innocent victims of his schemes." It was exactly what they wanted to hear. A path to redemption that didn't require them to accept responsibility for their own crimes. "Where is this evidence?" Emma asked. Vincent's performance reached its crescendo. "In my home office, hidden behind the false panel in my desk, financial records, recorded conversations, documentation of Troy's real business, everything needed to prove your innocence." "Why didn't you tell the police?" "Because," Vincent said, his voice growing weaker, "I was protecting your mother. Even after everything, I still loved her. But now I want to save my children." Emma and Ryan exchanged glances filled with hope and determination. They would go to the house, find this evidence, and use it to clear their names. Their father, dying and abandoned, was still trying to save them. They had no way of knowing that the house was under federal surveillance as part of Diana's case, that accessing Vincent's office would violate the terms of their bail, and that Vincent's evidence was actually detailed documentation of their own crimes, prepared by experts who knew exactly how to present it for maximum legal impact. As his children left Sunset Manor with renewed hope, Vincent felt the cold satisfaction of perfect revenge. They would incriminate themselves trying to save themselves, using evidence he'd created specifically for that purpose. The dying man they'd abandoned was orchestrating their destruction with the precision of a master tactician, and they were walking into his trap willingly, convinced he was their salvation. Thursday evening brought the completion of Vincent Morrison's masterpiece. Emma and Ryan arrived at their childhood home as federal agents watched from surveillance vehicles positioned throughout the neighborhood. The house remained under court-ordered monitoring as part of Diana's case, making any unauthorized entry a federal crime. Using keys they'd kept from their youth, Vincent's children entered through the back door and made their way to his home office. The room felt frozen in time. Family photos on the desk, awards from his military service on the walls, the leather chair where he'd helped them with homework decades ago. Emma found the false panel exactly where their father had described it. Behind it was a manila envelope containing dozens of documents that appeared to detail Troy's financial crimes in meticulous detail. "This is it," Ryan said, reading through bank statements and transaction records. "This proves Troy was running money through shell companies. Mom had no idea." What they didn't realize was that Vincent's evidence was a carefully constructed dossier that implicated them as deeply as Troy. Financial records showed Ryan's embezzlement. Email exchanges documented Emma's fraudulent billing. Bank statements proved both children had been stealing from their respective employers long before their parents' affair began. The surveillance team watched as Emma photographed the documents with her phone, an action that constituted tampering with evidence in a federal investigation. Ryan's decision to take several original documents was theft of materials relevant to an ongoing case. By the time they left the house 30 minutes later, Vincent's children had committed multiple federal crimes while gathering evidence they thought would save them. Friday morning brought the final act. Vincent received a call from Constantine with confirmation that all elements were in place. "Your family's legal situation is now irreversible," Constantine reported. "The children's actions last night guaranteed additional charges. Diana's terrorism financing case will prevent any plea negotiations. Troy's drug conspiracy evidence is overwhelming. And the timeline. The children will be arrested within hours. Trial dates are expected within 6 months. Diana faces a minimum of 15 years. Troy faces 20 to life under trafficking statutes." Vincent felt no joy in his victory, only the cold satisfaction of justice properly served. His family had betrayed him when he was most vulnerable, abandoning him to die alone while they planned their new lives with his money. Now they would understand the consequences of their choices. Dr. Walsh arrived for their final consultation that afternoon. "Are you ready to proceed with the next phase?" Vincent nodded. "I am. The treatment I've been providing will maintain your strength for another 2 weeks. After that, the cancer will progress naturally. You'll have time to see the results of your work and the facility here. Constantine's people will ensure you're transferred to private care. No one will disturb your final weeks." That evening, Vincent made his last call to his family. Emma answered from a jail cell, her voice hollow with despair. "Dad. Oh God, Dad. They arrested us. The FBI said we tampered with evidence. But the documents you told us about, they don't prove what you said. They make everything worse." Vincent's voice carried the weakness of approaching death, but his words were crystal clear. "I know, Emma. You know I created those documents. I orchestrated everything. Your arrests, your mother's troubles, Troy's charges, all of it." Silence stretched across the connection before Emma's voice returned, sharp with realization. "You planned this. You did this to us. You did this to yourselves. I simply revealed the truth about who you really are. We're your children." "No," Vincent said with final authority. "My children would never have abandoned their father to die alone. You stopped being my family the moment you chose cruelty over loyalty." Emma's sobs echoed through the phone as the full scope of their situation became clear. "Please, Dad, we're sorry. We made a mistake." "Some mistakes can't be forgiven." Vincent ended the call and powered down the phone permanently. There would be no more contact with the people who had once been his family. They would serve their sentences knowing that their dying father had orchestrated their downfall with surgical precision. Over the following weeks, Vincent watched the legal proceedings from his private care facility. Diana received 18 years for terrorism financing and tax evasion. Troy was sentenced to life without parole under federal drug trafficking statutes. Emma and Ryan each received 7 years for fraud and evidence tampering. Their appeals were systematically denied as Vincent's network ensured that every legal avenue led to dead ends. The evidence against them was overwhelming because Vincent had made it overwhelming. As Vincent's cancer entered its final stages, he reflected on the perfect symmetry of his revenge. His family had betrayed him when he was vulnerable, so he had destroyed them when they were vulnerable. They had abandoned him to die alone, so he had ensured they would serve their time alone. Dr. Walsh sat beside his bed during his final hours, monitoring his peaceful decline. "Any regrets?" she asked. Vincent's voice was barely a whisper, but his conviction remained strong. "None. They chose their path. I simply ensured they walked it to its conclusion." Vincent Morrison died on a Tuesday morning as winter sunlight streamed through his window. His last thoughts were not of family or forgiveness, but of perfect justice finally served. The network he'd built over 25 years quietly dismantled itself, leaving no traces of the elaborate revenge that had destroyed 4 lives. In death, Vincent had achieved something rare, complete and total victory over those who had wronged him. His will, read a week later, donated his entire estate to military veterans' charities. Diana, Emma, Ryan, and Troy received nothing but a single line that would haunt them through their prison years. To those who forgot that loyalty and love are earned through constancy, not convenience, may you find in your solitude the understanding that some betrayals echo through eternity. Vincent Morrison's final lesson was complete. Some people mistake kindness for weakness, forgiveness for opportunity, and love for obligation. They learn too late that the most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate. In the end, Vincent had proven that a dying man with nothing left to lose can be the most formidable opponent of all.